Welcome to the Renaissance Spirit.
Salve, traveler and seeker of truth, knowledge, and reason. I am Marcus Tullius Cicero, bane of tyrants, and for that very reason, I address you today. If you've read any of my works, you know that my writing was meant for Rome, and what I thought Rome needed to know, to understand. Similarly, I find it necessary to offer some sage wisdom on one of the greatest machinations in modern politics, the power of the far right to use any power necessary to reach their goals. And their goals? It is nothing new. The consolidation of power under the guise of morality. The twisting of belief to serve ambition. Indeed, both Julius Caesar and his successor, Octavian known, later as Augustus used religion to manipulate the state and the hearts of its people. Much like modern-day far-right conservatives in America, they cloak themselves in divine favor to control the masses. A fine trick, really. If you can make the gods, whether Roman, Christian, or otherwise, appear to side with you, well, who would dare oppose you? And yet, let us not fool ourselves. The far right in America, while draped in the banner of Christianity, seem to miss a rather crucial detail. Christianity itself does not support the very theocracy they so fervently wish to impose. The teachings of Christ, in all their simplicity, speak of charity, compassion, and yes, rendering unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and unto God what belongs to God. What does this mean, you ask? It means Christ made it abundantly clear that governance and faith were not to be conflated. The state has its responsibilities, the divine its own. A truly secular government, a republic if you will, does not force religious doctrine upon its citizens. Yet here we are, witnessing modern Caesars, or rather politicians, twisting these very scriptures to justify laws, bans, and mandates that curtail personal freedom in the name of morality. Irony, as bitter as wormwood. Take, for instance, the push to insert prayer back into public schools or to ban abortion based on religious grounds. These politicians would have you believe that they are the righteous stewards of a Christian America. But where, might I ask, is the biblical teaching that demands a religious republic? Is it the same book that preaches love for thy neighbor, that warns against casting the first stone, or is it merely another misreading to serve their lust for control? What the right gets right, if we can give them any credit at all, is that faith is powerful. Religion offers a moral compass, a sense of community, and solace in times of despair. But what they so woefully misunderstand is that the imposition of faith, through force or law, leads only to resentment and rebellion. Christ, my friends, was a teacher of persuasion, not coercion. He sat among tax collectors and sinners, offering love, not legislation. Now, I can almost hear the howls from those far-right pews. But Cicero, we are saving the soul of the nation. Yes, much like Caesar saved Rome, I imagine. No, dear travelers, they are not saving a soul. They are simply using it, using Christianity as a tool, a wedge to divide, to incite, to control. And if I may speak plainly, Caesar himself would approve. The hypocrisy, however, does not end there. These modern politicians, who speak of small government and personal liberty, seem all too eager to legislate what you do in your bedroom, whom you marry, or whether or not you can access medical care. It's curious, isn't it? They rail against big government, but wish to expand it into the most intimate corners of your life. So tell me, dear viewer, do you think Christ, who teaches free will, would approve of forced faith and a religious dictatorship by criminals such as Donald Trump? Now, as for what the far right gets wrong about Christianity, where do we begin? They have forgotten that the heart of Christianity lies not in laws or judgment, but in love. They wield Christ as a cudgel when he was meant to be a shepherd. And for what? To build a religious republic, a new Rome under their control, all while ignoring the central message of their faith. As I leave you to ponder this, consider what's to come. For if they succeed in turning America into their theocratic vision, what happens next? The next part of our journey will reveal what other faiths exist in the world, what they teach, and whether they too are rising in adherence or falling. After all, if you force one religion upon a people, how long before they look elsewhere? How long before they reject the gods you've chosen for them and seek out their own? But I digress for now. Prepare yourself for a tour through the world's great religions in our next conversation. Until then, remember this, my fellow seekers. History, much like faith, has a way of repeating itself. And those who wield power in the name of the divine should remember that they are neither gods nor Caesar. Now, where were we? Yes, the far-right's quest to turn America into a religious republic. Having discussed how they so conveniently misinterpret their own scripture to suit their needs, let us now consider the broader tapestry of the world's faiths. They're great at misinterpretation. Just look at the conservative Supreme Court for proof. After all, if they wish to force Christianity upon the American populace, what shall they do with the rest of the world's believers? Or dare I say, non-believers? First, let us remember how ancient Rome, in all its splendor, was a melting pot of gods. We Romans had a god for everything. Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Mercury. The list went on. And we were happy to add a few more whenever a new people entered our fold. You see, the Romans, for all their faults, understood that a vast empire could not function on religious uniformity alone. We welcomed the gods of others, sometimes cynically, but more often pragmatically. Why fight over theology when it was so much easier to let every man worship in his own way, as long as he paid his taxes and obeyed the law? Yet here we are, in America, witnessing a political movement that refuses to see the wisdom of such an approach. They demand not only a Christian nation, but their version of a Christian nation. But what of the other great religions? Shall they simply vanish? Let's begin with the elephant in the room, Islam. Yes, the faith that the far right loves to vilify. They paint it as violent, oppressive, foreign. But in truth, Islam shares many values with Christianity: charity, humility, devotion to God. It is a growing faith with over 1.9 billion followers worldwide. And while it faces its own internal struggles, much like Christianity, it offers its adherents a clear moral path. In countries like the United States, Muslims often find themselves in the uncomfortable position of defending their faith from those who, ironically, claim to be protectors of religious freedom. Let me remind you of the words of Christ. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Now, if the far right truly cared for Christian teachings, might they not extend this love to their Muslim neighbors? Or would they rather cast stones, as the Pharisees did, against those they don't understand? Next, we have the Eastern faiths, Hinduism and Buddhism in particular. Hinduism, with its 1.2 billion adherents, is one of the world's oldest religions, and like ancient Roman polytheism, it embraces a multitude of gods, each representing different aspects of life. Its teachings on karma, duty, and reincarnation offer a vastly different worldview, one that emphasizes balance and the cyclical nature of existence. But what of these teachings in America? Should we expect the far right to forcefully convert Hindus to Christianity as well, or will they be marginalized, their beliefs dismissed as mere idolatry, as was the custom in Rome's later Christian years? And then there is Buddhism, an irony in itself, as it teaches a path of non-attachment and compassion. If any religion holds true to Christ's message of love and kindness, it is this one. And yet, Buddhism too is growing, particularly in the West. How does the far right square this? Shall they legislate against meditation? Ban the teachings of the Buddha because they do not align with Christian doctrine? But it is not just the major religions we must consider. Atheism and secularism are on the rise, particularly in Europe and parts of the United States. Many, disillusioned by organized religion, or their sins and cover-ups, or their hypocrisy, seek solace in reason and science. They are the modern philosophers, walking in the footsteps of the Stoics, the skeptics, and yes, even the Roman Epicureans. And here, the far right faces a true dilemma. If they push too hard, if they force their version of Christianity onto the American people, they risk driving them away from faith altogether. Much like the zealots of ancient times, their insistence on dogma over empathy and understanding will lead to backlash. The harder they push, the more they fracture the very fabric they claim to protect. But make no mistake, other religions are growing, and as they grow, they challenge the dominance that the far right seeks to maintain. Islam is spreading, particularly in Africa and parts of Asia. Hinduism and Buddhism are gaining ground in the West. And atheism, ever the quiet challenger, is gaining ground as well. If the far right wishes to impose a Christian republic, they must contend with this diversity, a diversity that is not so easily tamed. Want some historical precedents? The Crusades, the Great Schism, the Inquisition, the doctrine of discovery, the Reformation, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, humanism. Let me pause here and ask you to consider this. What happens when you force one religion onto a people who do not all share it? History offers us a clear answer. Rebellion, resentment, fracture. The ancient Romans knew it. The far right does not. In our next discussion, we shall explore how this all came to be. How did the Republican Party, once a party of smaller government and individual liberty, become the torchbearer for conservative religion? What forces shaped this unholy alliance between faith and politics? Spoiler, it wasn't divine intervention. It was power, pure and simple. Power, the very thing that always drives men to twist faith to serve their ends. Remember, as I said in one of my better moments, to be ignorant of what occurred before you were born is to remain always a child. And I promise you, the children running this far-right theocracy will eventually learn that not all toys are theirs to control. Now that we've wandered through the world's faiths, pondering what happens when a single religion is forced upon a diverse populace, it's time we ask the all-important question: how did we get here? How did the Republican Party, the once proud champion of small government and personal liberty, come to be the vanguard of conservative religion? How, in the name of all that is reasonable, did they craft this unholy alliance between faith and politics? You see, it wasn't always this way. Once upon a time, conservatives prided themselves on their hands-off approach, leaving people to live their lives as they saw fit. The state was to be small, unobtrusive except when it came to military matters, of course. But the rise of the religious right, well, that was something else entirely. Let us turn back the pages of history, or in my case, ahead to the mid-20th century. The United States, fresh from its victory in World War II, was grappling with modernity, civil rights, feminism, and changing social mores. And there was a certain section of society, religious, conservative, nostalgic, for a simpler time, that felt all of this progress was a threat to their way of life. Enter the Republican Party, which saw an opportunity. They did what any smart politician or statesman would do when faced with a potential power base: they pandered. But this was no ordinary pandering. No, this was a masterstroke. By the 1970s, the evangelical movement in America had grown restless, searching for a political champion to stem the tide of what they saw as moral decay. They were angered by abortion, disturbed by the sexual revolution, and fearful of a future where their version of Christianity was not at the center of public life. And so, the Republican Party, led by cunning figures like Ronald Reagan, offered them a home. It was an alliance of convenience. The evangelicals wanted cultural influence, and the Republicans wanted votes. Never mind that the very notion of a religious state went against the spirit of the U.S. Constitution. Never mind that the Bible itself, as we discussed earlier, doesn't exactly call for political theocracy. This was about power, not principle. Reagan, the great communicator, knew this all too well. He was the Caesar of his time, using religion not as a matter of personal faith, but as a political tool to galvanize the masses. At campaign stops, he invoked God's will, spoke of family values, and painted the Democrats as morally corrupt. Much like Caesar invoking Jupiter to justify his march on Rome, Reagan wrapped his politics in a shroud of divine righteousness. The effect was immediate. Evangelicals flocked to the Republican Party. The so-called moral majority was born, and thus began the marriage of conservative religion and conservative politics, a union that, like all unions based on expediency, was bound to create deep fractures in society. But here's the irony: while the party claimed to be defending Christian values, the policies they promoted often did the exact opposite. They spoke of protecting the family, yet dismantled social safety nets. They preached personal responsibility, yet passed tax cuts for the wealthiest among them. Ah yes, quid est veritas? What is truth, after all, when power is on the line? Now, I must ask you, dear traveler, to consider the legacy of this alliance. The religious right's influence on the Republican Party has grown so strong that many now equate being conservative with being Christian, despite the fact that the actual teachings of Christ would likely have scandalized these modern Republicans. Can you imagine Christ, the friend of the poor and the outcast, standing alongside policies that punish the needy and protect the rich? It stretches the limits of credulity. And yet here we are. The Republican Party has taken up the mantle of conservative religion, not because it truly believes in the teachings of Christ, but because it knows that religion, when wielded correctly, is one of the most effective tools of control. By aligning themselves with the religious right, they have secured a base of voters who believe mistakenly that their political leaders are doing God's work. But what is God's work, truly? Is it lowering taxes on the rich? Is it cutting health care for the poor? Or is it perhaps the very opposite? It is not by muscle, speed, or physical dexterity that great things are achieved, I once wrote, but by reflection, force of character, and judgment. It seems to me that in their reflection, they've forgotten the lessons they claim to uphold. Now let us tease the threads of this alliance a bit further, for in the next chapter, we will see how the rich and powerful, the true architects of this political strategy, stand to benefit from this religious fervor. You see, while the far-right evangelicals chant and pray, the real power brokers are laughing all the way to the bank. The rich, after all, have always had a way of using religion to keep the masses in check. The story only gets more ironic from here. You won't want to miss how wealth, power, and piety dance together in this elaborate farce. It's a tale as old as time, and one I'm all too familiar with. Ah, dear traveler, you've returned for another chapter. We now find ourselves at a most interesting juncture in our story, where faith meets wealth, and power makes fools of the devout. For all the talk of righteousness, morality, and saving America's soul, It seems to me that the only true beneficiaries of this so-called moral crusade are the rich and powerful, the modern-day equites, the aristocracy draped not in togas but in tailored suits. You see, the brilliance of the Religious Rights Alliance with the Republican Party is not just its ability to capture votes, it's the way in which it has given cover to policies that disproportionately benefit the wealthy, all while claiming the mantle of Christian virtue. The great irony, of course, is that while conservative politicians talk of moral decay and God's will, they are quietly enacting laws that make the rich richer and leave the poor struggling under the weight of a system that favors the powerful. Much like the golden calf that the Israelites foolishly worshipped, the far right has turned wealth itself into an idol, despite their constant invocations of biblical principles. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, the gospel says. And yet, the architects of modern American conservatism have made sure that treasures upon earth are precisely what their policies deliver, just not for the masses. Now, let us not delude ourselves into thinking this is some grand misunderstanding. No, it is calculated, deliberate. The wealthy elite have long known the value of religion as a tool of social control. In ancient Rome, our emperors and aristocrats were well versed in using the gods to justify their power. Augustus, for instance, claimed divine favor to solidify his rule, all while concentrating wealth and land in the hands of a few. It was a trick as old as the Republic itself. If the gods are on your side, who can oppose you? Today, it is much the same. The wealthy have no need to wield swords or command legions when they have something far more effective: faith. By aligning themselves with the religious right, they have managed to build a political base that will vote against its own economic interests, all in the name of preserving Christian values. But what Christian values exactly? Is it the value of charity? I think not. For while the faithful are told that tax cuts for the wealthy will somehow lead to prosperity for all trickle-down economics, as they call it, what we actually see is the opposite. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and yet the cycle continues because the wealthy have cleverly wrapped their greed in a shroud of moral righteousness. Take the tax reforms of recent years as an example. We were told that cutting taxes for corporations and the ultra-rich would lead to job creation and higher wages. And yet, as anyone with eyes can see, the only things that truly increased was the wealth gap and the price of everything. The faithful, many of whom struggle to make ends meet, continue to support politicians who promise to protect their religious freedoms while quietly selling them out to the highest bidder. This, dear traveler, is the great manipulation. The wealthy have made themselves into the high priests of this new political religion, standing in the temple of capitalism, preaching that prosperity is a sign of God's favor. It's no different from the days of Caesar, when the wealthy patricians sat in the Senate, justifying their privileges as divinely ordained. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And while we're on the topic of manipulation, let us not forget the media, their version of a Roman praetor enforcing the will of the powerful. Conservative news outlets, funded by the wealthy, spew rhetoric that stokes fear, resentment, and division. They speak of a war on Christianity, of how liberals want to destroy religious freedom, and how the wealthy must be protected at all costs because they are the job creators. The truth, of course, is that they are protecting only themselves. As I see it, the modern-day Republican Party and its wealthy backers are no different from the rulers of Rome, who kept the plebs entertained with bread and circuses. But instead of gladiators and chariot races, they offer the spectacle of cultural warfare, social media, and fake news, like climate change denialism, constantly drumming up fear of moral collapse, all while robbing the populace blind. They distract the faithful with battles over abortion, gay marriage, and school prayer, while quietly passing laws that benefit the wealthiest among them. But let us be clear, this is not a flaw in the system. It is the system. The rich have co-opted faith not because they believe in it, but because they know it is the most effective way to keep the masses in line. The faithful vote for politicians who promise to uphold their moral values, but what they are really doing is voting to uphold a system that benefits the few at the expense of the many. And here, we reach the bitter truth. The rich and powerful are not the saviors of the Christian faith, as they would have you believe. They are its greatest exploiters. They have turned religion into a tool of control, using it to shield themselves from scrutiny, to pass laws that make them richer while the rest of society struggles. But as history has taught us, empires built on exploitation and hypocrisy do not last forever. Eventually, the people will see through the charade, just as they did in Rome. The rich and powerful may think they can control faith, but faith is a fickle thing. It can turn on them just as easily as it has been used in their favor. Which brings us to our next topic: reason, logic, and empathy. The virtues that could save us from this cycle of manipulation. How might we move forward, not through the lenses of greed and control, but through compassion and understanding? But that is for the next chapter. Remember, the more laws, the less justice, I once said. And today, the laws are many, but the justice, well, that remains to be seen. Now that we've seen how the rich and powerful have twisted faith to serve their own ends, we find ourselves faced with a daunting question. How do we counter such manipulation? How do we break free from this endless cycle of exploitation disguised as moral righteousness? In ancient Rome, we philosophers held a simple belief: reason is the highest virtue. It is through reason that we come to understand the world around us, to make sense of chaos, and to guide our actions. But today, reason has been cast aside by those who would prefer that you live in fear and blind faith. It has been replaced by demagoguery, by appeals to emotion rather than truth. Logic, once the cornerstone of public discourse, has been trampled by those who profit from misinformation. You see, reason and logic, these are dangerous tools to those who seek to control. For when the people begin to think critically, to question authority, to seek out truth for themselves, they become harder to manipulate. The rich and powerful, with their media empires and political machines, would much prefer that you remain in a state of ignorance, distracted by the latest outrage or moral panic. And so reason is discarded, dismissed as elitist, or even unchristian. But this, dear viewer, is where they are wrong. True Christianity, like any great faith or philosophy, calls not for blind obedience, but for thoughtful engagement with the world. Consider the words of St. Paul: test everything, hold fast what is good. Within the Christian tradition, there is a call for discernment, for critical thinking, and yet, those in power would rather you simply accept their version of the truth without question. Let us look then at what happens when reason is abandoned. We see it in the rise of conspiracy theories, in the rejection of science, in the way that empathy has been stripped from political discourse. The far right tells us that the poor are to blame for their own misfortunes, that immigrants are a threat, that those who suffer deserve their suffering. But reason, logic, and most of all empathy tell us otherwise. Empathy, that most human of virtues, seems to be in short supply these days. The wealthy and powerful preach a gospel of individualism, of pulling oneself up by one's bootstraps. while conveniently forgetting that many have no boots to begin with. They tell us that government assistance is a crutch, that healthcare is a privilege, and that charity should be left to the private sector. But what of the Christian teaching of caring for the least among us? What of Christ's call to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to shelter the homeless? It is here that reason and empathy must come together. For without reason, we are easily led astray by those who seek to divide us. And without empathy, reason becomes cold and detached, concerned only with abstract ideas rather than the real suffering of our fellow human beings. It is the marriage of these two virtues that allows us to build a just and compassionate society. Let us pause for a moment to consider what this could look like in practice. Imagine a world where policy is not driven by fear, but by facts, where scientific evidence is not dismissed as fake news, but embraced as a tool for bettering the human condition. A world where empathy is not seen as weakness, but as strength, a guiding principle for how we treat one another, regardless of faith, race, or nationality. Now, I can hear the skeptics already. But Cicero, people are selfish by nature. Politics is about power, not compassion. And to that, I say, nonsense. Yes, power plays a role in politics, as it always has, but history shows us that societies built on reason and empathy are more stable, more prosperous, and more just. Look to the great civilizations, those that embraced philosophy, science, and humanism, and you will see a pattern. They thrive when they prioritize the well-being of their people over the greed of their elites. Please let me know in the comments below if you would like me to a video on them. And what of the atheists, the secularists, the agnostics? They too have much to offer in this dialogue. For though they may not subscribe to any particular faith, they share with the religious a common humanity, a belief in the dignity of the individual, in the importance of compassion, and in the power of reason to improve the human condition. This is not a battle between faith and secularism, but a struggle between those who seek to control and those who seek to uplift. It is time, traveler, for a new era of public discourse, one that does not rely on the manipulation of faith or the exploitation of fear, but one that embraces the best of what humanity has to offer: logic, compassion, and a shared commitment to the common good. If we are to rebuild the fractured society that the far right has created, we must start with these virtues. We must ask ourselves, what kind of world do we wish to create? One where the rich and powerful continue to exploit the faithful for their own gain, or one where we treat each other with the dignity and respect that all human beings deserve? As I said once before, any man can make mistakes, but only an idiot persists in his error. It is not too late to correct our course, but we must be willing to think critically, to engage with the world around us, and to practice empathy in all that we do. In the final chapter, we will take a closer look at how this one example of the far right's manipulation of faith reflects their broader ideology, a philosophy that is not built on love, logic, or truth, but on fear, division, and control. And we will return to a final message from St. Paul, whose words, if taken seriously, might just be the antidote to the toxic politics of our time. So faith, hope, love remain, these three. But the greatest of these is love. Remember, the welfare of the people is the highest law. And when we forsake reason and empathy, we forsake the very people we claim to serve. Ah, dear traveler, we have arrived at the final leg of our journey, or at least, in this video, through the twists and turns of history, through the manipulation of religion, the corruption of politics, and the abandonment of reason, we have seen how the far right's philosophy crumbles under scrutiny. But now we must confront the grandest hypocrisy of all, that those who claim to follow the teachings of Christ have, in truth, betrayed the very essence of those teachings. For what did Christ himself say? So faith, hope, love remain these three. But the greatest of these is love. And yet, I see little love in the politics of the far right. I see division, fear, and control. I see hatred of the other, whether they be immigrants, the poor, or those who simply think differently. I see policies that punish the vulnerable and protect the powerful. And through it all, I see the constant invocation of Christian values as a shield to deflect criticism. But where is the love in policies that strip healthcare from the sick? Where is the love in rhetoric that demonizes those fleeing violence and poverty? Where is the love in a system that enriches the few at the expense of the many? This is the great hypocrisy that defines modern far-right politics. They preach about faith and moral values, but their actions speak louder than any sermon. They claim to follow Christ, but their policies and their politics reveal a very different truth. In my time, the gods of Rome were many, and faith was as much a matter of public duty as personal belief. But even from my perspective, it is clear that the far right's version of Christianity is not the Christianity of love, empathy, or compassion. No, it is a twisted version, a Christianity that serves the interests of power, not the people. It is not a faith of humility, but of hubris. And how do they justify this? They cloak themselves in the language of righteousness, of tradition, of defending the moral fabric of society. But let me tell you a truth that I learned long ago. Those who claim to be defending morality are often the ones most eager to abandon it. Power, when cloaked in virtue, is more dangerous than power that stands naked before the people. Now let us return to St. Paul's words, for in them lies the solution to this hypocrisy. So faith, hope, love remain these three, but the greatest of these is love. If we are to rebuild society, if we are to counter the forces of division, fear, and greed, we must start with love. Love, not as a vague feeling or a shallow sentiment, but as a guiding principle for how we treat one another. Love demands empathy. It demands that we see the humanity in others, even those we disagree with. It demands that we care for the poor, the sick, and the marginalized. It demands that we listen to reason, that we seek truth, and that we act with compassion. But where does this leave us? How do we, in this fractured and polarized world, embrace love, reason, and empathy in a way that can heal the divisions that have been so carefully cultivated by the far right? It begins with rejecting the false dichotomy they have created, this idea that you must choose between faith and logic, between religious conviction and compassion for others. In truth, the two are not opposed. Faith, when practiced with humility and love, can be a force for good in the world. And reason, when used wisely, can guide us toward a more just and equitable society. So, dear traveler, if we are to move forward, we must embrace both. We must be willing to challenge the hypocrisies of those in power, to demand that they live up to the values they claim to hold. We must reject the politics of fear, division, and hatred, and instead build a society based on love, logic, and empathy. Ah, dear traveler, once more you have stayed the course, and for that, I commend your perseverance. As we reach the end of our journey, I must now speak plainly, for what I say next may well be the most important lesson of all. If my words have resonated with you, then you will understand this. We stand, as I once did in Rome, at the threshold of history, where each decision we make whether to stand firm in truth or to be swayed by fear, will ripple through the ages. The far right of this modern age, like the tyrants of old, has shrouded its true intentions beneath the banner of virtue, twisting the very foundations of faith to justify their lust for control. They claim to wield righteousness, but in truth, they wield fear, seeking to divide rather than to unite, to conquer rather than to build. Yet, we who cherish reason, logic, and empathy must not falter. We must remain steadfast in our pursuit of a world governed by truth, by understanding, and by compassion. You have seen, as I once saw in the halls of the Roman Senate, how easily the people can be swayed when love is replaced by hate, when knowledge is supplanted by ignorance, and when fear is used as a weapon. I fought against such forces in my time, as you must fight against them in yours. Consider this. What does it mean to live with the Spiritus Renati, the Renaissance spirit as you call it today? It means, as it did in the days of Rome, and as it does now, to engage with the past, not as a collection of relics, but as a living dialogue, a conversation that stretches from those who have come before us to those who are yet to be. Historia. History is not a dead thing, but a guidepost, reminding us of the errors and triumphs of those who came before. Will we repeat those errors, or will we build upon the virtues of reason and love, virtues that the far right has so readily discarded in its pursuit of power? The choice, as always, lies with us. Nostri posteri, our descendants, will look back upon this era and judge us by the choices we make now. Will they thank us for saving our world from the ravages of fear and greed? Or will they scorn us for allowing it to fall into ruin? You, traveler, must now decide. Will you carry forward the torch of wisdom, or will you be consumed by the flames of division? The Spiritus Renati. This Renaissance spirit is not merely a philosophy, it is a way of living, of thinking, of striving for something greater than oneself. It is the pursuit of truth, of justice, and above all, of humanitas, our shared humanity. So, let us continue, you and I, on this journey through time. Let us look to those who came before, to learn from their wisdom and avoid their mistakes. Let us remember that the greatest of these virtues is, and always will be, love, caritas, the highest expression of what it means to be human. And through love, guided by the firm hand of reason, we shall build a future that honors our past and shapes a world worthy of the generations to come. For, as I once wrote, the welfare of the people is the highest law. Let that law be our guide. Let us serve not the powerful few, but the many who are in need of hope, of justice, of love. Viv Spiritus Renati. May we walk together into a future shaped not by fear, but by wisdom, compassion, and understanding. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I want to elicit a dialogue with you. And please subscribe, like, and share, and check out my other videos. I have much more to share, and if you've walked with me this far, we're well acquainted for the journey ahead. Thus, dear traveler, we return to the core of this discussion. It is not enough to see the hypocrisy of those who manipulate faith for their gain. We must stand firm in our principles, our reason, and our empathy. For it is through these virtues and through love that we may yet create a world that is just and true.